as they would march in, taking Kaliningrad back. Polish would send all of their soldiers to the border and would quickly try to find an ally. But it would already be too late, as Russians would take some of their soldiers and even stoop into their territory. With the enemy pushing even more day by day, and with no allies coming to help them, they would end up being destroyed once again. With them now under the Russian control, Russians would be the first victor in this war. However, their armies would lose a significant amount of soldiers due to the hard-fought battles, and they would have to lay low for now. The only thing they would do is persuade Belarus to officially join them, creating their plans for total domination over the European continent. Next country that would begin its conquest would be the Germans, who would want to take control once again. With their hunger for power growing once again, they would want to get revenge on France first, and would start preparing for them. However, they would again attack the Benelux states, who would all quickly start preparing to defend. Germans would shock everyone and prepare the strongest army in Europe in such a quick time, sending them all to the border. With a quick burst of attacks, Germans would be able to push all of them back in a classic German fashion, which would eventually end in Netherlands falling in a record amount of time. French soldiers would see this and would abandon their allies, getting their forces back to France, letting both Belgium and Luxembourg get demolished. The French would immediately send all of their soldiers to the border, having the army to parry or even beat the German army. However, Germans would have the advantage since Paris would be really close to the border. They would use that fact and would focus their attacks on that part, pushing French troops back. French soldiers would try to defend Paris, but the Germans would already push too deep. With a decisive fight happening, Germans would be able to overpower them and would step in Paris, taking it once again. The rest of their troops would try to regroup, and they would do exactly that. In the south of France, they would try to make a last stand and attack the enemy. At first, it would look like they would be succeeding, since the Germans would fall back. But soon, it wouldn't be like that. Germans would quickly form an offensive, which would completely tear through the French lines, and would end up with them defeated, allowing Germans to take their full territory. Germans would use this situation and would immediately ask Austria to join them. However, they would refuse and would send all of their available forces trying to defend. They wouldn't be able to do much, since German forces would overwhelm them and would push into their territory. Austrians would be able to shock them and prevent them from destroying them. With seeing this situation, Czech Republic would join in to help Austria, pushing into German territory. It would look like the Germans would finally lose, but it wouldn't be that easy. They would send all of their special soldiers, which would push the Czechs back into their territory. With them under control, they would be able to knock out Austria out of this war, which would eventually lead to the Czechs being defeated as well. It would look like nobody can stop the Germans. Ireland would see how Germany is dominating, and that would motivate them to mobilize their army and attack UK, wanting to get Northern Ireland back into their control. Since they wouldn't be expecting this attack, UK forces would be absolutely destroyed, letting Irish forces easily take over their territory, proclaiming Greater Ireland. However, UK would quickly act and would split their forces in two, sending one part to the north, while the other one would go south of the Ireland. Since their army would be huge, they would attack hard from both sides, making the Irish army fall back and eventually beating them, reclaiming their territories. Scandinavia would be affected next, as Finland would start mobilizing their forces first, sending it to the border with Sweden. Sweden wouldn't wait long, as they would answer their attack, sending their troops to defend. However, since Finland would have a lot more forces, they would be able to break the Swedish defense, eventually pushing them back. Sweden would try to make a last stand, but the Finnish would just be too strong, leading to the downfall of the Swedish forces. Finland wouldn't stop there and would continue westward, attacking Norway. Norway wouldn't have much soldiers and would be forced to defend, but it wouldn't be easy. They wouldn't let the enemy pass and would think of a genius idea to beat them. They would call both Germans and Russians to join this battle, promising them land. With them both accepting, Germans would easily push into Denmark, taking it before they can act. Russians, however, would tear through